how should we view what the Education Secretary is doing here? Is he interfering with the free speech of teachers, or is he imposing a much-needed safeguard for the children in our classrooms?
I think this guidance is an important step in the right direction. I don't think it's going to deal with the problem of impartial teaching entirely. The whole idea is that teachers are supposed to be teaching a broad and balanced curriculum, and that means allowing for a proper diversity of views to be explained and explored within the classroom, but not to be partisan. So the Education Act 1996 already explicitly states that teachers are not supposed to teach in a way that is partisan. And what we've seen, and the Free Speech Union has received many, many emails from concerned parents about this, is that there is a lot of partisan teaching going on. And in one sense, it may be because the teachers are perhaps not aware of the fact that the law is that they should not be teaching such partisan political positions, or it may be that that they are aware of it and are choosing to do so anyway, or perhaps they simply don't realise that these views are partisan. So, for example, the teaching of things like white privilege or toxic masculinity, things that are contested views that within their circles they may believe are just the norm. These are things that we've been seeing taught, throughout schools around the country, and it's extremely concerning. Black Lives Matter is another political organisation that has had a lot of influence within many schools around the country, and so this is an important step. But I think the concern will be that there is no enforcement mechanism in place to ensure that this guidance is actually being upheld by teachers, so that concerned parents can actually seek to address the problem if it arises.
Well, yes, I mean that's absolutely what struck me, Emma, that the Education Secretary is issuing guidance. I mean, it seemed to me maybe this was just a way of generating a headline or two. I mean, I don't see that guidance makes much difference. I mean, the point has already been made that the legislative framework is in place and it hasn't changed for a number of years. And many people would say that it was quite explicit on the subject. So are you a bit cross with the Education Secretary for creating headlines without actually any enforcement?
No, I think it's a step in the right direction, and I think there are some within the Department for Education that are quite serious about tackling this issue. And so I think it is a step in the right direction. And, we've seen from, for example, some of the unions who have criticised this, including the National Education Union. And I think it's quite telling that the critics of this guidance are those who actually have pushed for partisan teaching within schools. So, for example, the National Education Union helped to put together this guidance that was reported on last year that encouraged the teaching of white privilege within nursery settings. So it makes sense that they would therefore be opposed to this guidance. So I think we need to look firstly at the people who are criticising this guidance, but also to see this as being, an important step, because it is the case that it is already the law that teachers shouldn't teach in a way that is partisan. But it is also, even though this is non-statutory guidance, this does give teachers an important reminder that they are supposed to be teaching impartially, and gives them examples of what that means in a current context, whether it's relating to climate change or whether it's relating to issues to do with race, or as we've seen, to do with the British Empire. The government have been quite clear in the guidance that they're not trying to limit the scope of what can be taught. They're just trying to ensure that teachers aren't forcing their opinion or contested views on students and presenting them as facts.
Well, we're fortunate to have on our show one of Britain's best-loved trade unionists, that is to say, Paul. So, Paul, what is your reaction to the position of the National Education Union?
I'm not sure much of the trade union movement would share your assessment there, but it's very flattering anyway. Look, I mean, I suspect that the teachers' unions will oppose any guidance along these lines. I think that they will probably be quite happy for many of their teachers to kind of peddle their own particular views in the workplace. But my view is simple. Look, schools are for teaching and not for preaching, ultimately. I didn't know any of my teachers' political views when I was at secondary school. I never asked them, and they never volunteered the information. I suspect they wouldn't have dreamed of volunteering the information. But it seems to me when you go into schools now, there is very much an attempt to peddle particular political moral cultural positions and to indoctrinate children into articulating those positions. Now, I'm a great believer in free thinking and in children taking part in political debates, but it needs to be done in a balanced and measured way, and it shouldn't be done in such a way that they just regurgitate a particular view because it's come down on high from the teacher. And that does seem to me to be what's happening in some cases. The thing in the Nottingham school recently where the kids were encouraged to write letters to Boris Johnson calling on him to resign. I want Boris Johnson to resign, but I don't necessarily support that kind of method. So we do need to look seriously at these sorts of issues.
So, Emma, let me put a practical example to you. It has been taught for many years that Sir Winston Churchill is a great national hero. Is it also possible, in balance, to say, but he was also the Prime Minister at the time of the Bengal famine, where possibly we don't know how many millions of people died. Is it possible to teach those two things alongside each other?
I think it is. And, you know, the guidance that the DFE have issued actually is quite clear that teachers should use their own reasonable judgment in this. And so, you know, when we're talking about particular historical figures and we're talking about putting people in context, often what you see is actually that the context in which they're put gives a very partial selection of facts that are particularly negative. And so in the case of someone like Winston Churchill, you can present, and again, this, as the DFE guidance states, it should depend on the age of the student. And perhaps when it comes to contested histories, that should be something for older students when they can actually make their own critical assessment of those facts. But to present, you know, just simply the historical facts about a particular individual, explaining why they are such a renowned figure in our history, but also explaining the historical context of that. And in my personal opinion, I think it's also important to explain to students the complexity of history and of historical figures, that no single individual is entirely good or bad, and in contested histories you have to have a more nuanced, sophisticated understanding of history and the particular context. So I think it is possible to present those histories in a balanced way, but as the guidance states, you know, it's something that teachers should be sensitive to the age of the student, or it actually says in the guidance the developmental stage.